let's get to this story about Burlington, right? So police departments see modest cuts, but not defunding, right? So this is from the AP. That's from the New York Times. A year after defund, police departments get their money back. Son of a bitch. The cops are getting their money back, certainly there. There's another one, Burlington. Now, here it is. Burlington decided to cut its police force 30%. Here's what happened next, right? So here we go.
In Vermont, roll call looks a little different than it used to.
I know it was a long night.
Often just 5 officers are on shift for a city of more than 44,000 after Burlington's leaders cut the police force by nearly 30%, essentially imposing a hiring freeze.
We had huge numbers of people making real demands about changing policing, saying we don't want police to participate in certain kinds of calls for service, we don't want as many police, all of which had real merit, but none of which was being done with any kind of specificity or deliberation.
In the wake of George Floyd's murder, the city council voted to divert part of its police budget to social and racial justice programs. But working officers began to leave faster than anticipated, down to just 64 in a short period of time. Many who left felt like the city turned on them.
Do they tell you why?
They do.
What have they said to you?
The exit interviews have been pretty clear that it was about a lack of support in a political sense and a sense of saying that this is not how I want to serve anymore. I don't feel valued.
Councilor Zariah Hightower felt like reform was overdue.
We had all these issues leading up to the pandemic and leading up to the murder of George Floyd. For us, it wasn't just a national problem. It was a problem here at home.
Burlington police data shows black drivers have long been disproportionately stopped and then searched. And there were recent controversies over use of force involving black men and people with mental health issues.
We're a relatively good department, but it's kind of a low bar when you look at policing in America. And I do think that we've got great people in our police department who want to do the right thing, but that's not the same thing as the outcomes.
With fewer officers, some routine patrols stopped altogether.
They're just not there.
Mark Bouchette and his family have owned this home goods store for 35 years. He says the police couldn't respond quickly to disturbances, prioritizing more serious calls. He and his staff felt their absence.
They said, we don't feel safe in the evenings.
In Burlington, Vermont.
In Burlington, Vermont.
It's all taken its toll on those who remain.
What is the morale right now at the Burlington Police Department?
It's in rough shape. I know that what has been expressed to me from officers and even my own frustrations about the job not being able to police as effectively as we once could.
Realizing there was a problem this fall, the city council reversed course and voted to bring back more officers.
The resolution carries.
We're in a situation that I think nobody wanted us to get to.
In other words, there are some unintended consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
The department hired social workers to handle mental health calls and other community issues.
I will never betray my badge.
Now, Chief John Murad is working to rebuild his ranks.
Ultimately, we don't want to defund. We want to fund. Good policing is expensive. I think that has ultimately proven to be a grand experiment on a national and local level that's gone awry.
Stephanie Gosk, NBC News, Burlington.
So they defunded the police. The most progressive people in the city council pushed it. And then there was a lot of problems. It seemed like they had only 5 cops for a city of 44,000 for an overnight watch. People were complaining about quality of life issues and things like that. And to the point where the progressives who pushed, that got pushed for the funding of the police, came back and said we should fund it. So let me bring in Garland Nixon. And Garland, what do you make of this story?
A couple of things here, Jimmy. Number one, and you know, I am for significant police reform, but I was never crazy about the term defund the police. And I think we see here one of the issues with it, because you're kind of saying, I don't really know what that means. Defund the police is that some people argue that it's abolition. People who oppose police reform seize upon the term defund the police and argue that it's abolitionist. And to be quite frank, I find that a lot of people say that 50 and up in the Black community don't like the term because it has the sound of anarchy. It's not the rhetoric of reform. It's more of an anarchist / libertarian rhetoric that says get rid of or abolish, when the reality is, I think most people want some level of reform. And I put it like this: people like me want significant reform. So the question becomes, here's an obvious question. If defunding the police is the answer, then it must be a money problem. So if the problem with police is too much money, then decreasing the money should fix it. They dropped the police by the number of police in that town by 30%. If the problem was too many cops, well, then less cops would solve the problem. So I think it isn't that a simplistic way of addressing this police culture. I think that's what the issue. It's more complicated than that. You can't just say, we'll have fewer police and, we will start some basic things of moving some money around, and then we'll give it 1 year. And then 1 year later, we'll say, well, we had some problems, and those very simplistic things we didn't solve the problem. Question, a number of questions. Was police accountability an issue? To me, there is no way you can ever have a cultural change in law enforcement until you deal with accountability. If I can go out there and do all kinds of terrible things, knowing that whatever I do, I'm going to get away with. I mean, it's just like having a kid. They're going to do as much as you let them get away with to some extent. You have to have some guardrails. And I think just cutting down the number of, it sounds good, it seems good, and people are behind it, but I never saw it as something that was good, that was valid. And I always had a problem with the term defund the police because it's so amorphous. I like something more concrete, like Medicare for all. Now there's a term, you hear it, you understand it, and it's difficult for your adversaries to use it as a blunt object to beat you over the head with.
So let's just go through some of the particulars about this case in Burlington. A year and a half later, no one, it seems, is happy, not even the counselor who proposed the resolution. We're in a situation that I think nobody wanted us to get to, says Councilor Zawaria Hightower, a member of the local dominant Progressive Party. The mayor, who didn't support cutting the force, agrees there's a lot of damage that's been done in the last 16 months. Burlington is home to one of the country's most forward-thinking police departments. It has long prioritized community policing, and it has been praised for its approach to the opioid crisis. Its police chiefs implemented reforms ahead of the curve, from mandating body-worn cameras to cutting ties with federal programs that gives military equipment to police departments. About 74% of its current force holds bachelor's or more advanced degrees, about twice the national average, according to a study. Despite the department's progressive bona fides, by 2019, it had come under increasing scrutiny from activists after a series of controversies, including use of force incidents involving black men in a city of less than 6% black. In September 2018, a police officer responded to a report of an altercation at a bar. Body camera video shows the officer approach the suspect, a black man named Jeremiah Mell, and immediately knock him to the ground. Mell hits his head on a brick wall and appears to lose consciousness. In 2016, Burlington police officers fatally shot a man in mental health crisis. In 2019, a police officer was punched by a man in crisis and struck back, punching him in the face. The man died. Wow, mental health crisis is pretty vague, though. I mean, wasn't Mike Myers from how wasn't he having a mental health crisis? Anyway, it sounds like a new flavor of Ben & Jerry's up in Vermont. Anyway, here we go. While Burlington PD has been an innovator in some areas, it has really dropped the ball in several others, says Joey Diaz, a guy from the American Civil Liberties, namely disproportionate use of force with people of color and generally how it operates when it comes to working with young people with disabilities. Before defunding, Burlington averaged about 95 effective or active duty police. Today, the department hovers around 64 and only 5 on at night. The lower number of officers forced the department to remove some specialized positions, including an emergency response officer who managed police responses to complex crisis. It removed street crime team that investigated robberies and drug activity. Emergency calls became prioritized by seriousness, meaning it often took police longer to respond to quality of life complaints and nonviolent crimes. And Burlington Police Department has an incident data for 2021, which shows that the total number of incidents fell by 11% in the first 11 months of the year compared to the same period last year. Certain types of incidents did become more common, however, including burglary, vehicle thefts, and mental health issues, and overdoses. And since 2020, nearly a dozen communities across the U.S. have significantly altered their enforcement budgets, but the movement to defund has faced a backlash, especially in the face of a soaring nationwide homicide rate. Some have increased police budgets to pay for reforms, while others have reversed defunding decisions. In Austin, Texas, slashing the police budget by 30% created many of the same issues Burlington is dealing with, from an exodus of police officers to intense political clashes. So it sounds like when people say defund the police, it ends up actually getting them refunded. So I always thought defund the police meant, hey, let's use some of the money we're using for policing to maybe do some preventative stuff. Like we'll have social workers and we'll have, I don't know, maybe some kind of activities for people, whatever. It would take that money and you redirect it towards mental health or something else, right? Or drug treatment, instead of incarceration. And so that's what I thought defund the police meant. I've heard other people say defund the police means start over, get rid of all the police departments and start in a new way of policing. That's another that still takes funds. You're still going to need funds to do that. So what do you think, like the people who support Black Lives Matter mean when they say defund the police? What do you think they mean?
Again, that's the problem. It's a sad state of affairs, and we've got to have a discussion over what the rallying cry means, but we do. And I think that most people are like you. There's some level of confusion over what it really means. And so what do you get? If you don't even know what policy you're really asking for, then the people that are instituting it can institute any policy they want. Certainly, if you, and let me add this on the numbers they were talking about, increase opioid and addiction problems. It reminds me of the broken windows theory in New York. They argued the broken windows theory was working because crime went down in New York. But at the exact same time, it was going down everywhere in the United States because the economy was getting stronger. So if I looked at the numbers and the things that were getting worse in Vermont, I would certainly have to take those and compare them to national averages, to compare them to cities like that, and to see if that was an anomaly or if that's just the way things are going. I'm sure addiction is going everywhere here. But I think the problem is you've got a lot of people who are angry, validly so, and who want change validly so, but it's such a complicated issue. They're not sure what they want. So when they say we want to defund the police, you've got people that want to get elected. They know they got to do something. They're like, okay, what is it you want? Less cops? You got it. Less money for them? Sure, you got it. It's too simplistic. You need a suite of policies that include some things about training. You have to accountability also includes some kind of civilian review boards where not only the officers, but the people who run the department actually feel like and they have to answer to the community. You have to have, again, a police department should never be able to investigate itself for any. So I'm just saying it's more complicated. They gave the most simplistic answer to it. It didn't work. And, maybe that's kind of what they prefer. That's what you want. Let me give you something simple. And then when it doesn't work, I'll say, see, leave us alone. We're going back to what we're doing.
So I think I've said on this show that policing is out of control in America because of, now I'm blanking on what that thing is called, where they can't be sued if they violate your civil rights. There's a much higher.
Both blanking. So.
What is that? Yeah, I'm
blanking. I should know.
It's something immunity. It's
qualified immunity.
Qualified immunity.
Yes.
So I think we need to get rid of that. And what's happened is our police forces has become like accountable to no one, like you said. And I think when people say defund the police, what would go a long way if every police department had a outside board, a civilian review board that took on all the complaints of people about brutality and actually did something about it. As right now, the police investigate themselves and nothing happened, or a prosecutor from the DA convenes a grand jury and nothing happens because you can make a grand jury do whatever you want. So that's a big problem. There's no accountability. And we studied this in depth. We had a gentleman on from the Baltimore Police Department, and he had studied this issue, and he talked about, when a police department usually dictates to the community how they're going to police them, and he made the point it should be the opposite. Is that the community should tell the cops how we want them to police us? Like, what are you going to do when you catch a kid who's out for curfew? Do you want us to arrest them or take them home? What about drug offenses? How should we treat them if they're, so we should tell the police how to, and so that's the big problem, is that the cops are now dictating, and of course the police unions are very strong and they have a lot of political power. So some people have said they don't think police should be the one group of people who shouldn't be allowed to have a union. They have even said that. What do you think about that?
I don't agree with that, but I do think that it is abused. I'm for unions for every single person, so I don't agree with that. But I do think that the union should not be allowed to be used to get rid of accountability. And that's what we've got here. Again, you've got to ask yourself before you say, okay, I want to take an action, defund the police, cut the number of police. What is it that you want? What is the problem? What are you trying to achieve? Right. And the first thing I think is, what I'm trying to achieve is I don't want cops to, number one, we don't want cops abusing people. We don't want police officers using violent means at an unnecessary time. And we don't want, when they do use violent means, when they are involved in brutality or shooting or whatever, we want to feel like there was a fair investigation. We want to feel like it was an unbiased investigation. We want to feel like they're held accountable for those things. And I think, to me, that's the first problem before you start talking about, I don't care how many cops you have. If you've only got one cop and he can beat the crap out of me and shoot me between the eyes, even if it's a cheap gun, if they don't have much money, so they give him a cheap gun and he shoots me with it anyway. Cutting all the money and cutting the people and leaving an unaccountable a police force is going to accomplish nothing for me. That's why I've always worked for police accountability, because I came from law enforcement, and that's what I saw. I worked in law enforcement, and one of the things that I saw is this. If you think about this, recessions. I remember this recession of 1990-91. Maryland State Police laid off cops. Police budgets went to the point where it was like, okay, you can't drive anywhere. You have to sit around because we can't afford to burn gas. All those things happened temporarily, but that didn't change anything. Because if they did get involved in something, they weren't going to be held accountable. And if somebody was going to be investigating them, it was going to be their buddy that they were on a bowling league with who was in internal investigations. How far is that going to go? So that's why I personally believe, I don't disrespect the people who are for defund the police. I understand where they're coming from. But because of my background, I say, I don't care how many cops there are and how much money they have. If they're not held accountable, and if you don't have an unbiased investigation and you're trying to deal with the violence against people, and particularly first and foremost against people of color, but we see it against homeless people, poor people, you name it, then you're going to have to deal with the issue of accountability. That's what changes the culture.
So how do we do that? I mean, so we all know this is the solution. We have to have some accountability because there really isn't any. So how do we implement that?
Okay, I can tell you. Now, let me tell you something. When you go say cut the budget or things, well, sure, whatever, no problem, we'll do that. Now, when you say, okay, we got something different, we want to look at the policies. As an example, I remember one of the policies of a police department. It was unthinkable. And I'm not going to name the department because I'm not 100% sure which department it was. Okay. But when an officer was involved in something and there was video, by policy, before the officer was questioned, he or she was allowed to view the video of the incident. Well, come on. Once they see the video of the incident, anybody can make up a story based on the video of the incident to get themselves off. They can go talk to their lawyer who can come up with a story. So there are a lot of policies that are that are involved in police departments. Another one in Maryland. In Maryland, when it comes to brutality complaints, there's a time limit. I forgot what the 90 days or 60 days, however amount of time it is, but there's a time limit on how long it is before you can, you have to file to file a brutality complaint. And if you don't file it, if you're a day late, I'm sorry, you can't file it. Those things are designed to stop officers from being held accountable. We had to argue in legislature against police officers saying, well, the law in Maryland may still be, that you couldn't make an anonymous complaint against an officer. They couldn't be anonymous. You had to go in, you had to let them know who you were. And the police officers were saying, I think that's fair. And I said, wait a minute, go on the website of every police department in Maryland, and there's a tips line that says you can make anonymous complaints against criminals. So I can make an anonymous complaint against a civilian, but I can't make an anonymous complaint against a police officer. So those are the kind of things that we have to look at the accountability statutes. And a lot of times it's regulations in the within the police department made by the local legislature or made with their agreement when they made their collective bargaining agreement. Those are the kind of things, details that may seem kind of wonky, but that's what makes a difference.
But so it's, I mean, how do we get there? Like Black Lives Matter, we had, it was the biggest civil rights protest, I think, in the history of our country, almost every city from coast to coast. So obviously people's consciousness are raised about this. We got it. But now what's the next step for all those protests? What's the next step to make sure something like what you're saying happens? It has to be done at a local level and something like that, even though it seemed like the protests were on a national level.
I think there has to be a suite of policies, not, let's not get too wonky. I mean, I'm talking not like talking about writing up the Magna Carta, for God's sake, but 8 or 10 things that have to be decided, and that those should be pushed to legislatures. Because keep in mind, like you're saying, it's very important to understand that a lot of this stuff is on the county or city. You can have a little police department with 5 people that says, has all of their own rules. I think part of it is it should come through Congress. It should be mandated through Congress. That way, you don't have a little police department in this town that has 5 officers and they have all these rules and regulations regarding accountability. And then the state police or another police department or the sheriff's department has a different one. I think it should go through Congress. It doesn't have to be complicated. There's a handful of policies that can be very, very effective to change the accountability issue, but I think it has to go through Congress, really.
Well, that's a good, I didn't think.
Good luck with that.
I didn't think. Yeah, good luck with that. But I mean, people really want accountability. People want cops. People want police. That's the thing. And when people are polled, do you want to defund the police? They're like, no, I really think we want the police. But they want an accountable police department, and that's what we got to get to. And I think taking away qualified immunity would be the first step. And the second step would be mandating, there's a Graham Elwood word, mandating that each municipality that has a police department also has to have an outside civilian review board for all complaints of brutality. And
investigations. Investigation, there has to be, you could say that each state, one of the things you could do is you could say that each state has to have a department, and that department investigates all police brutality, any or use of force. And that can't come, they can't hire retired officers as investigators, because they'll do that. And it can't be the prosecutors and the people who work with the police department every day. Now that's somewhere where, and I think this is important because I've worked with stuff like this. You could have something where we had an agreement with Maryland State Police that I was working on, where this like panel of people that we chose, and it had to be agreed. At the time, it was the NAACP, the ACLU, and the police union, and they had to agree on the people. But I'm not saying the police union should be involved, but there should be a thumbs up or a thumbs down for who you hire for those investigations, and there should be whoever your citizen group is that is involved in oversight, they should be able to look at who you're planning on hiring for this investigative department, and they should be able to say, we'll take this person or we won't take this person based on their background. Because a lot of times you can look, this person was a cop for so many years, whatever. You may want them, you may not. So I wouldn't want to completely exclude former police officers, but that's what you have to do. You give the citizens the oversight, the ability to choose and or at least to reject people who are going to be involved in this investigation organization who investigates, that the state has, that investigates all departments in that state. I think that's important. That's critical to me.
I agree. People want accountability. We need accountability. We're what I say is we're the world's largest penal colony. We got more people in prison than China. It's unbelievable. So we love to lock up, and especially poor black and brown people. We love to lock them up in America. It's just amazing how we lock up nonviolent offenders in this country. And it's because of a for-profit prison system that was the architect of that, Joe Biden, ladies and gentlemen. So if you voted for Joe Biden because you like black and brown people, I'm sorry, spoiler alert, didn't work. Garland, want to say anything, last words before we say goodbye?
No, but I want to thank you for the opportunity. And look, here's what I want to say to people who are like pushing defund the police. I'm not your enemy. I'm not opposed to what you're saying. I think you're on the right track, because what you're saying is we want dramatic and significant police reform. I just think you've got to understand, look at it and say, ask yourself, what is it that we want? And what I'm doing, will it get me there? And you know, it sounds good, and defund the police is kind of a nice chant that sounds good at a rally. But when it comes down to it, you've got to have a suite of policies, say 5 to 10 things, and you got to say to Congress, this is what we want. And if you don't give it to us, then we're not going to support you. But then again, you know, you saw what kind of luck Ice Cube had with that one last time. But what the heck, I think it needs to be pushed. Maybe people will learn, since Ice Cube told people they needed to do this, they wouldn't listen to him. And now, pretty much as he predicted, Joe Biden has not held up to a single one of his campaign promises.
Yes, we played that clip on Ice Cube many times on the show. Yeah, Trump's gone on day one. Then what? Then what? And here we are. We're in the then what. Everybody come see our live stand-up shows. We're coming to Raleigh, North Carolina at the end of January, and Philadelphia in February. See you there.